Hello, Jerry here with Season 3, Episode 23 of Ask Jerry Tachoir. Once again, if you'd like to ask me a question, simply go to my website, which is tachoir.com, Tachoir.com. And in the upper right-hand corner is a little Contacts tab. Just simply click on that, fill out your name and information, and ask your question, and then perhaps we'll do one of these videos. Today's video question comes from Lawrence in Manitoba, Canada. Hello, Jerry. Thanks for taking the time to assemble all these educational videos. They have been very helpful. I noticed from seeing you live and in listening to your recordings, your improvisations are so smooth and seemingly thought out, almost as if they had been orchestrated. Do you learn a solo, or how much preparation do you do to improvise so well? Looking forward to hearing from you. Best, Lawrence. Okay, very good question. Well, Lawrence, I can honestly tell you, in all my years of performing both live and in all my recordings and any recording that I've ever done, I have never learned an improvised solo in advance in any capacity. In other words, I never wrote out a solo, I never memorized a solo. As a matter of fact, I find that to be an incredibly complex thing to do. To me, the word improvisation means spontaneously creating music based upon your situation, based upon who you're playing with, how you're feeling, your mood. And all these factors are something that you can't really reproduce other than at that moment. So all of my solos that I improvise are absolutely unique and just a one-time occurrence. As a matter of fact, when I do my recordings, I always make sure with the engineer that everything is working properly. All the wires are connected properly. There's no hums or buzzes, because when I do a performance, the first take of any recording is generally my A material. It's the stuff that I am the most creative on at that given moment, that just comes out. And then again, if we have to go back and do another take for some reason, then I'm never going to start in the same way. I'm never going to start in the same direction or the same range or anything. It's going to be totally different. So because of that, this then may become like my B information. It might be my B solo, whereas the A solo got away from me. Or it might be just as good too. Now, when I was at Berkeley teaches you, and this was the most amazing thing that I ever dealt with in dealing with music. But you analyze everything. You learn a piece of music and you analyze the melody notes. Is this the third of the chord? Is this the fifth of the chord? Is this the tension 9 of the chord? You go through all the melody and you analyze the melody. So you know what the melody is doing. And then you analyze the chord changes. Is this a 2-5-1? Is this a 6 chord? Is this a chromatic diminished chord? Is it, whatever it is, you go through and analyze all that, just like you do in theory class with the brackets and the arrows. This is a 2-5-1 going to a 1 chord. This is a 3 chord, et cetera, et cetera. So once you know all that, then you assign a chord scale or a variety of chord scales or something else that's associated with each one of those chords. This gives you then the framework to develop your improvisations. These are the notes that basically can be played and sound good because of that scale in association with the chord. Now, that's not to say that you can't play other notes that are not in that scale. It's just that you have to utilize those notes because they're going to be somewhat dissonance into an effect that allows it to resolve into one of the notes that you know is good. So outside notes, so to speak, like that we're talking about, can be very effective if resolved properly, and it creates a nice dissonance resolution. So as you're soloing, you're trying to hear all this, and initially it's complicated. I remember when I was first studying, I analyzed all this stuff, and I'm playing this tune, and I'm thinking Dorian, Mixolydian, Ionian, I'm playing that scale, and then Phrygian scale, and I remember my mind just being very busy doing the analysis and finding the scales and trying to create melodies based off of those scales. And it was a really cumbersome thing to do, and it took kind of a long time. It was really one of those things where you're overthinking everything. And then I remember one day that on a tune that I knew really well, I just started playing, and all of a sudden, the whole thing went away of the analysis, and it became just music because I knew what the scales were. I knew what the chord changes were. I had the tune very much memorized, and then I can just play. Then I can find melodies and listen to how the pitches need to resolve and where they need to go, and didn't have to overthink it. So we want to get to that point where you can look at a piece of music and without having to get out the piece of paper and pencil and do the diagrams and stuff, you're able to see the resolutions of the chords and how the chords move and what they have an effect on each other, and related chords next to each other, and trying to find similar scales and things like that. And once you get all that together, then you can play and improvise, and then your music becomes yours. But I do want to thank you for the fact that you mentioned that my solos sound very orchestrated, and I take pride in it. I'm always trying to find a solo that kind of develops. It sort of starts easy, and it builds up in tessitura and gets a little bit more aggressive, and I make my statement, and then I kind of like relax it and move out into the next soloist or the next tune, whatever we're doing. So I try to treat it as an orchestrated piece of music as opposed to just rambling and just playing scales up and down, which I find very boring. And I try to make a melodic passage out of my knowledge of harmony, out of my knowledge of the associated scales, and using my ears to hear, does this sound right? Is this going to work? If not, make it work, find the resolution of that dissonance, resolve it properly, and then move on. So, Lawrence, I hope that gave you the information you needed. Again, thank you for your question. It was a really good question. I didn't want to get too deep into the whole theory analysis part of it because that would take a long time. But I hope you understand what I'm talking about in terms of really putting the time in to learning a piece of music inside and out. And once you know it that way and you have it memorized and you know the chord changes and you can play the scales that are associated with it, and there's not generally just one scale. A lot of times you'll come to a chord, and you, especially on dominant chords, where you have variations. You could be mixolydian, it could be altered, it could be whole tone, just on and on and on, altered scales and everything else. And even hybrid scales. Sometimes I actually create a scale because the melodic note that's given by the composer doesn't really fit into what I would expect that scale to be. So because of that, then I incorporate that note within a hybrid scale, a scale that I'm making up on the fly, and utilizing that in my improvisation. That's the gist of it, and keep practicing, and I think you'll figure it out one time, and it's really not that complicated, but give it some time. So thank you again, Lawrence. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.